So I want to, before we get started on the forum, I just wanted to recognize a couple of groups here today, again, before we get started on what I think is a very interesting and relevant topic, walkable urbanism. But the first group I want to thank is the audience. Thank all of y'all for coming and participating, and I look forward to learning more about this topic with each of y'all, and also invite you, obviously, afterwards to kind of a networking forum. The second group of people that I wanted to recognize are the people that kind of did the heavy lift to make sure everything was in order today. And if you could hold any applause till I read the list or name the list, I'd appreciate it very much. But and if they're in the room, please stand up. But the name that I call every year, Leah Ziegler. Leah, I'm not sure she's in here. She has literally put this event on her shoulders the last 9 years and into the proverbial end zone. Does a great job. Brad Sauer, Jr. Brad is instrumental in identifying this worthy topic, but also helping us arrange the speaker. Other folks, Paul Denton, Jamie Thomas, Jamie Young, Roberta Vaya, Taylor Fidel, Roberta Vaya, if I didn't say that already. But please join me in an appreciation for those folks. So as you would expect, I have the easiest job, which is largely to ask the CEO of Union Bank and Trust, John Asbury, to come up here and start the forum. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Asbury, as Mark said, from Union. Our pleasure to be a sponsor in this program. Our sponsorship really ties back to that of Zenith Bank, which I understand is a longtime sponsor, and I believe Galen Layfield, former CEO of Zenith, is here somewhere. As I hope you know, on January 1st of this year, Zenith became a part of Union Bank shares, and in doing so, we have recreated something we've not seen in the Commonwealth in 20 years. That is the Virginia-based, independent, statewide regional bank, along the lines of names you may remember that are long gone, like Signet, Crestar, Central Fidelity, Sovereign, First Virginia Dominion Bank. I was a Virginia banker of the 90s era, and it's really a thrill to be a part of a company that's serving the entirety of the Commonwealth, based right here in Richmond. So that is exciting times. As I was checking before the program, I noticed it's a bad day in the markets. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down over 2%. Union is up 2%, so I'm happy. We did release quarterly earnings this morning. We're off to a great start to the year, and that's a nice proof point that the combination with Zenith and Union is going very well, business as usual, and that is a good place to be. All right, so let me move on in terms of the introductions here. Actually, I would like to start by recognizing the sponsors, and you'll see that displayed up on the screens. Troutman Sanders, Sauer Properties, Union Bank and Trust, Kiter, Atlantic Real Estate Capital, Marsh & McLennan Agency, known locally as Rutherford, Baskerville, West Creek, and Spyrock Real Estate Group. I do have a few housekeeping items. We've been asked to please silence all cell phones, so if you do that at this point, that would be very much appreciated. And as you heard, at the conclusion of the program, we will have a reception with an opportunity to network and to speak to Chris Lineberger. As someone who lives in a walkable area of the city of Richmond, I'm very interested to hear what you have to say, Chris. And next, I'd like to welcome R.J. Nutter, partner with Troutman Sanders, who will introduce our keynote speaker. R.J.?
Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you all have come out in this rather inclement weather. If ever we needed walkable urbanism, it's a day like today. I have the pleasure, first of all, I'm a partner with Troutman Sanders, proud to be here, one of the longtime sponsors of this event. And my partners in Richmond were kind enough to invite me down from Virginia Beach, where my office is located. We're still trying urbanism in our area, but y'all have been far more successful than we have. But I did have the pleasure today to introduce our speaker, who has a remarkable background in real estate. He began, if you will, by starting one of the world's largest real estate consulting and development companies in the United States. Sold that, good idea, sold that company, and since that time, I can't put one single badge on him to describe him other than to say he has been a real estate consultant developer. He's the author of over 15 books, professor at the University of Michigan, Brookings Institute, and currently has a chair at George Washington University. He's been working in urbanism and for longer than many of us have thought it was a good idea. In fact, he's been working in urbanism while many of us were debating the size of cul-de-sacs in suburban development projects. So it's with great pleasure that I have a chance to introduce our speaker, Chris Lineberger. And one side story before I begin today, or he begins. Poor guy, driving in today with his wife from Washington, where they reside, and hit 2 potholes. Fortunately, it was a city street, and he was driving relatively slow, but blew out both front tires. So he arrived here by virtue of a tow truck. And we're happy that he stuck that out, happy that he's here today with us, and it's a pleasure to introduce Chris Lineberger.
Well, I do love Richmond. In fact, my wife and I come down here at least once per year. You have a fabulous art museum. Can't wait to see the new Contemporary Institute. Great restaurants. And so we've been coming here for years. So in spite of the fact that wiped out 2 tires, that I haven't popped a tire in 40 years. But life is pretty easy for us, as you probably know, because the tow truck shows up in 20 minutes, takes us to the Audi dealer, and we get a loaner, and we're here. We're like 30 minutes late for being here, so it's not a big deal these days. And by the way, that car, and it fits in with what we're talking about, that car is, we've had that car for 18 months, and this trip we just pushed over 4,000 miles. Because we live in a walkable urban place, and so we don't really need it that much. And this is, back 20 years ago, when I was running Robert Charles Lesser and Company, that we were the specialists in a master plan of communities. We worked on Brandon Mill starting back in the 1970s. And the company, again, which I sold, works on more master plan communities than anybody. So I was like all the rest of you back in the 80s and 90s. We were doing drivable, suburban kinds of product. That's what the market wanted, and that's what they got. Well, the market's changed. And that's what today is about, because you're seeing a rebirth in Richmond of walkable urbanism. And hopefully by the time you leave this afternoon, you'll understand that this is no longer just a niche market for strange people that want to walk to work and they want to walk to restaurants. But we found in many markets, it is the market. And what you have right now in Richmond is, of course, a great opportunity because of the bus rapid transit that's just about to open. And I've actually been involved working with your mayor, working with your city council and planning people on that 15-station BRT line. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. So the big question to you is, are you going to take advantage of that $65 million gift that the feds and the state of Virginia gave you? Because you only have $8 million in that deal. So first to understand is the role of transportation in the built environment. That we in urbanism understand, and that by far transportation of the 16 infrastructure categories, transportation is first among equals. In fact, it drives development. It drives where the market's going. And by the way, just so you know about what we're talking about as far as the size of real estate development and all the infrastructure that supports it, it's a mere 35% of the wealth of the country. It's the largest asset class. If you took all if you took the capitalized value of all the NASDAQ and all the New York Stock Exchange companies and doubled it, real estate's bigger. That's also, by the way, why we in real estate are very proud of the fact that of the last 3 recessions, we caused 2 of them. And I think you'll understand that we really did it up really well this last time. But so transportation drives development, and the transportation system that we, the people, select dictates the form of that built environment. So for the last 50, 60 years, we built, obviously, freeways for cars and trucks. And we disinvested in all forms of transit. And for that, we got drivable suburban development. What drivable, that there are only two ways to build the built environment: drivable suburban and walkable urban. That's it. And drivable suburban is very low density, and all the different product types, residential, retail, office, industrial, are separate from one another at super low densities. And the only way to get around between those buildings is by cars and trucks. The other is walkable urban. And that means that we need multiple transportation options, that you basically need a portfolio of transportation options. Cars and trucks, of course, but transit, biking's really important, and of course, walkability. And once you get to a walkable urban place, everything's walkable. That means it's very high density. It's 5 to 40 times more dense than drivable suburban. And once you're there, it's walkable. What that means is that we, for 6,000 years, have only wanted to walk about 3,000 feet, about a half mile. So going back to your high school geometry, pi r squared, these walkable urban places are anywhere from 100 to 500 acres in size. That's 3 or 4 times larger than a regional mall, including its parking lot. And those walkable urban places basically have they have a governor on how big they can get, because it's how far we want to walk. So 2 ways of building, 2 different infrastructure investments to create those 2 different ways. So there's a corollary to that transportation drives development. The corollary is that we don't build transportation systems to move people and goods. That's not why we build them. That we build transportation systems for economic growth. That's the goal. The means is by moving people and goods. So every time that you invest in your transportation system, the question is, what economic good will it achieve? And we're not asking that question. And as a result, we're confusing ends and means, and we're making a lot of boneheaded decisions and a lot of multi-billion-dollar mistakes. So, coming back to why we built drivable suburbanism. Well, one of the reasons is that the building of that machine 50 years ago was where about 45% of all jobs, directly and indirectly, originated. It's the raw material that went into the manufacturing of, the sales and servicing, the insuring, the financing, the fueling, the entire petroleum business, and building the roads for the automobile. So if you remember, you gray hairs out there, you may remember that GM or Chevy had that tune, "See the Chevrolet," or "See the USA in your Chevrolet." Well, as you were seeing the USA in your Chevrolet, you were becoming wealthier. It only made sense to build drivable suburban places that forced us all to drive, because it was creating wealth in this country. And we wanted it, of course, great market demand for it, because we had just invented drivable suburban 100 years ago. So great pent-up demand, and it made us wealthy. What's not to like? So up until 100 years ago, all we built was walkable urban. Look at the fan in Richmond. That's all walkable urban. That was all built 100 years ago and before. Well, after the Second World War, we pushed that pendulum all the way over, and all we built was drivable suburban. And we disinvested in our cities. So this is how we laid it out throughout the country. We first started, we learned how to build freeways from the Germans. Eisenhower came back with that notion. And we invented subdivisions. And we then figured out how to build regional malls. This is King of Prussia Mall outside of Philadelphia, which is where I grew up. When my mother took me to the King of Prussia Mall in our car, driving on the freeways to this one-of-a-kind regional mall, I thought I had died and gone to heaven. I thought this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And we also moved, of course, our businesses out there. We invented business parks. Well, we've gotten much better at building freeways, and this is from the capital of freeway construction in this country, where I was last week, Texas. And we've just continued to push the boundaries out, because we have a lot of land. For every 1% population growth in the late 20th century, we expanded our land mass by 6 to 8%, otherwise known as sprawl. And what we've done is that we would go out to that next ring, that next edge city, which was a transitory word, and we'd use it, use it up, throw it away, and move further out. But we had lots of land. So we used it, threw it away, kept on moving out. So that was the late 20th century. So one of the things that Brookings and George Washington, or what I do at Brookings and George Washington, is I demonstrate the viability of great movies to explain what we're doing, and also television shows. And the most important urban movie, I can prove this without numbers, I just made that up, that is Back to the Future. That it is the only movie that I know that shows the two ways of building the built environment, drivable suburban and walkable urban, in 3 different time periods. And it was written in the early 1980s. And the writers nailed it. So this first clip shows downtown Hill Valley. Downtown Hill Valley, those of you that are not in real estate, we in real estate name our communities after what we destroy to build them. So the hill is dumped into the valley, and this silly name, Hill Valley, is where this movie takes place. And so this scene opens in downtown Hill Valley in 1955 when, of course, we gray hairs, this is how we grew up. A great walkable urban place that was really quite idyllic. So this really ideal little downtown, a plaza surrounded by retail on the ground floor, office, residential up above, and a great civic use down there, and that you could get there by car, truck, bike, or skateboard, if you're Michael J. Fox, and this was the center of the universe. But even then, that the seeds of change had been planted. That back then, in 1955, this is the billboard that Marty McFly, Michael J. Fox, parked his DeLorean behind. It was a billboard advertising the subdivision to be built where he was born. So let's fast forward to 1985, downtown Hill Valley. It's a little bit different place. So, X-rated movie theaters, homeless sleeping on the street. Behind the homeless guy is the old plaza that's been paved over and turned into a surface parking lot. So now, Marty's going out to the new center of gravity in Hill Valley. And that is, if I can make this thing go forward, there we go. That is, of course, the regional mall. This is where all the activity in 1985 located. Can you turn that up just a tad? So here he's walking. He is running down this 2-lane highway, or this 2-lane access road. And of course, nobody in real life goes down that access road. There's not even a sidewalk there. And of course, you notice that it was the Lone Pine Mall. The Lone Pine Tree had to go to build the mall. But that Lone Pine Mall and the strip malls and the business parks were built at a density of, for those of you in real estate and design, it's the floor area ratio of 0.2. Very low density, which means that it had 20% coverage of the land with buildings, 80% was surface parking lots. So that was a fundamentally different form. But that's what the market wanted, and we in real estate gave it to them. Well, then the market went and changed. We moved from the industrial age to the knowledge economy, and we're moving next into the experience economy. The industrial economy is still with us. It's now 9% and falling of all jobs. But that 9% is incredibly productive. So where are we earning our living? In the knowledge economy, which is over 50% of all jobs are in the knowledge economy. This is the creative class. And we think that the experience economy is going to layer on top of that. And both of those economies are demanding walkable urban places. Or at least they want the choice of both drivable suburban and walkable urban, depending on where you are in life. And so we began to see, and this is back when I was still a real estate consultant working for hundreds of projects per year throughout the country, we began to see that the pendulum started to swing back somewhere in the mid-90s. We started to see downtowns turn around. We started to see suburban downtowns turn around. We couldn't figure this out. Where was this coming from? And we know who to blame. It's the damn kids. It's their fault. It's the millennials driving this. And you can see this on television, that when we gray hairs grew up, it was Leave It to Beaver and Dick Van Dyke and the Brady Bunch, all set in the suburbs. Fast forward, starting with Seinfeld and Friends and Sex and the City and Two Broke Girls, all set in safe, vital, walkable urban places. Now, Hollywood does more consumer research than any business I know. They are focus group testing this thing. They are coming up with different endings. They have the Nielsen feedback instantly. This is not Hollywood pulling us by the nose in one direction. This is a reflection of what we want. And just as Dick Van Dyke and the Brady Bunch was a reflection of what our parents wanted back in the 60s and 70s. There are other reasons. The baby boomers, that if you millennials think that we baby boomers are going away, you've got another thing coming. We are never leaving. But the baby boomers, of course, have become empty nesters. We are retiring. And some, not all, are deciding to move to walkable urban places. And by the way, both the millennials and the baby boomers are also driving a major trend that we're seeing, that's probably the major trend, which is the urbanization of the suburbs. This walkable urban trend is not just the turnaround of our downtowns and our downtown adjacent places. Probably, again, 60% of the demand, say, up in Washington, D.C., is the urbanization of the suburbs. It's Arlington, it's Reston Town Center, it's Bethesda, it's Silver Spring. So it's both, the walkable urban is going to the urbanizing suburbs as well as to the downtowns. So when you add up these two largest generations, you look at the demographics, and they've fundamentally shifted. That when we gray hairs were growing up, 50% of all households had school-aged children in the household. 50% were singles and couples. Today, it's 25% of all households have school-aged kids. And obviously, singles and couples are the target market for walkable urbanism, though I live very close to Georgetown, and Georgetown just has this baby boom going on. On Halloween, my wife and I always go to Georgetown. It's just packed with kids going out trick-or-treating. So we're seeing the same thing throughout the country, that people can raise kids in in these walkable urban places. But when you look at the future growth, as far as marginal growth of households over the next 20 years, 14% of that marginal growth is going to include children living in the household. 86% are singles and couples. The market's telling us something. As I mentioned earlier, that during the late 20th century, all we built was drivable suburban. When many of you moved here to Richmond, that if you weren't born here, that when you moved here 20, 30 years ago, you had a choice if you had a choice of where you would live. That choice was a single-family home or a single-family home. And where you would shop would be a 1980s strip mall or a 1990s strip mall. There was no choice. And we Americans get bored when we don't have choices. As I mentioned, the creative class is driving this. So south of Market in San Francisco and the meatpacking district in New York, this is where the future is being invented. And it's walkable urban. And then finally, it's just the sheer expense of owning a fleet of cars to participate in society. That when you look at how we spend on cars, on average, we spend 19% of our household income on cars. It's the second highest category of household spending. If you disaggregate the data, the drivable suburban households are spending 25% of their income on cars. Walkable urban is 9%. 16% delta is hundreds of billions of dollars per year. And for Richmond, that money leaves the local economy. It goes to Saudi Arabia and our friends in Venezuela. It goes to Detroit and Stuttgart. Very little of it stays here. We also know that there's pent-up demand because of just a vast array of consumer research that we've seen from the National Association of Realtors. My old company does a lot of this. But this is one of my favorites. It was a colleague of mine at the University of Michigan. He looked at Atlanta and Boston, what you could argue are the two bookends of metropolitan America, and found that 30–40% of us want walkable urban, 30–40% of us want drivable suburban, and 30% are agnostic. They can't make up their minds, whatever. So it's roughly, it's a 50-50 split as far as whether we're going to go walkable urban or drivable suburban. But now look at the supply side. In Boston, if 20% of the product is walkable urban, I'd be surprised. In Atlanta, it's less than 5%. So when you have, high demand and low supply, what you have is, of course, pent-up demand. And what we're seeing throughout the country, because consumer research is nice, but people don't always do what they say and what they tell the upholsterers. But the real issue is, what do they do? And we're seeing walkable urban price premiums on a price per square foot basis, anywhere from 40 to 200% on a price per square foot basis. And in fact, this is an old slide. I'm about to show you what's going on up in Metro New York, and it's pushing 400% price premiums for walkable urban versus drivable suburban. So, Back to the Future nailed this as well. So in Back to the Future 2, and by the way, don't look at Back to the Future 3, it's worthless, but Back to the Future 2, that they take you to the near distant future of downtown Hill Valley, and it's a fundamentally different place. So here he is walking into the plaza, which has now been turned from a surface parking lot back to the center of town. It's a new open space. The buildings have been all redeveloped, some torn down and built at a higher density. These writers nailed it. And they got everything right but one thing, and I think you know what that is. They always promise us flying cars. We never get flying cars. And when was that? October 21st, 2015. that any of you that in fact remember the 80s, none of us would have guessed that by 2015 we would have been bringing back our walkable urban places. We had thrown them away. Well, they're back. And this is how it's being built out in the metro area just to the north of you. Why my wife and I, we raised our kids in Santa Fe, New Mexico, because we could live any place, because the company had 6 offices, and I was in one of 6 offices. I decided to be in 0 of 6 offices and raise the kids in Santa Fe. And then after they left, we looked around and said, where should we go? And Washington just popped up, A, because I was involved with Brookings, but B, all the research showed that Washington's the model by which we're building the future of our country. And that there are more walkable urban places and more walkable urbanism in Washington than any place else. And it starts with, we now know that there are 8, maybe 9 different types of walkable urban places. It starts with downtown. Downtown, throughout the country, of course, are turning around, just like downtown Richmond. Then downtown adjacent places. These are places 360 degrees around downtown, like DuPont and Noma and Capitol Riverfront, and now the Wharf, that have a different character, different economic base. They surround downtown. This is happening throughout the country, not just here, not just in. And then we have urban commercial. These are, H Street and Columbia Heights and Friendship Heights. These are places that had a regional role 50 years ago. They all went downhill economically. Now they're coming back as regionally significant walkable urban places. Then we go out to the suburbs, suburban town centers. These are places that were, farm to market kind of places back in the 18th, 19th century. They all went downhill economically, like downtown Bethesda. I'm going to show you that in just one second. And now they're all coming back because they have a great grid of streets, they have historic buildings, they have character, people want to live in them, people want to invest in them. Then the biggie is the conversion of drivable suburban places towards walkable urban. And that big red blob up there, you know that well, that's Tyson's. 2,400 acres, 48 million square feet of unmitigated traffic hell. And it is converting rapidly towards walkable urbanism. But it's a big bet. The property owners are betting on it. They're paying for much of that infrastructure themselves. It's a really, if you know a development magazine, which is put out by NAIOP, the cover story of the next issue is one that I wrote about the challenges and the progress that Tyson's is making. But the jury's out. It's a really big bet. And then finally, Greenfield developments. And the granddaddy of them all, one that I worked on with Mobil Oil back in the late 80s, is Reston Town Center. That when Mobil and our company and others were coming up with the concept of a grid of streets on a greenfield site with high-rises right up to the sidewalk, we took it to the urban land and we had a panel come and look at it. And the urban land developer said, you're crazy. Only a really stupid oil company with more money than sense would build Reston Town Center. Reston Town Center from day one had 60 to 80 cent price premiums over the competition, and they absorbed twice as fast from day one. Now, introduce another concept which is called the favored quarter. The favored quarter is the place that we invested most of our real estate investment dollars in the late 20th century. And you know where the favored quarter is. There's 382 metro areas. Every one has a favored quarter. And in Washington, it's to the northwest. You know where the favored quarter is when you understand where the white upper middle income housing concentration is and where the local minority housing concentration is. Race has always dictated real estate. And in Washington, it's the white upper middle income is Montgomery County and Fairfax out to Loudoun. And the local minority population is Prince George's County, primarily black and Hispanic. So we've seen most of the drivable suburban growth go into the favored quarter. The early walkable urban growth went there too, but now we're beginning to see the expansion of the favored quarter in this new walkable urban world, as we're seeing more and more economic development going to the northeast and to the southeast, into Prince George's County on the Green Line. I think it's one of the most important social equity trends of our age, bringing opportunity to low-income neighborhoods. Let me show you how it plays out on a price per square foot basis. These are the various product types in a real estate, and these are the rent premiums per square foot, anywhere from 22% higher for walkable urban versus drivable suburban to 119% higher. This also ignores, however, the cap rate premium, that walkable urbanism gets a 40–50% valuation premium. So you have to compound this. So what you're really looking at is most of the income properties are really 80 to 120% price valuation premiums, walkable urban versus drivable suburban. We just finished doing this up in Metro New York as well. We looked at the entire metro region, 23 million people, 19 billion square feet of space, worth $6 trillion. Nobody's ever done this before. And we divided the walkable urban land and drivable suburban land, all of it. It's, by the way, Metro New York is the size of the state of Maryland. And so we dropped the land into those two categories, and we then dropped it into the two economic uses of land. Local serving, which are bedroom communities, that's on the right, and regionally significant. Those are places like where we are right now, where we make our wealth as a metropolitan region. And the interesting thing is that in Metro New York, the total land that is walkable urban is 2.5% of the total land in Metro New York is walkable urban. Obviously, Manhattan's a big chunk of that, but Jersey City and downtown Stamford, downtown Princeton, those are the walkable urban places. It's only 2.5%. The other 97.5%, that's drivable suburban, it's illegal to build walkable urban. You cannot do it legally without changing zoning laws. And what is the answer you get when you want to change the zoning law? No, over my dead body. So that's partly driving these price premiums. By the way, 53% of the gross regional product in the region is generated in that 2.5% of the land. And 55% of all real estate value is there. Now, looking at it as far as, looking at the total of those four different categories that I just showed you, you see that red bar, that the average value of a walkable urban square footage throughout the region, this is housing, office, it's a mere $750 per square foot is the value of the walkable urban. The drivable suburban is $200 per square foot. A huge price premium for walkable urban versus drivable suburban. And then the question is absorption. What are we doing? How much of this stuff are we taking down and using? That upper chart shows the absorption of office space from 2010 through the end of 2016, so 7 years of absorption of office space. 140% of the office absorption in Metro New York went to walkable urban places, to under 2.5% of the land. So how could it be 140%? Business parks are emptying out. They're not just losing market share, they're absolutely losing occupancy. One of the great questions that urban land is now asking itself throughout the country is, what the hell do we do with all these obsolete business parks? There's only so many fundamentalist churches and gymnastics organizations to fill them up, paying $1 a square foot per month. By the way, the other interesting thing up here is look at the industrial. This was the most surprising thing about New York, that with the industrial, 59% of total industrial absorption was walkable urban. This is the Brooklyn Navy Yard. This is the maker space, artisanal manufacturing. Shocked me. I still can't believe it. 59% of industrial, which is always gone, drivable suburban, low-rise, truck-oriented. Then here is how they perform. There are 300 drivable suburban places, edge cities in metro New York, and there's 150 walkable urban places. The walkable urban is in green. The bottom of this chart is their walk score. How many of you know what walk score is? Very few. You've got to understand walk score. It's the best way of measuring walkability. And you'll see in a second why that's important to know. It's a website. You put in any address in the country, walkscore.com, any address in the country, any neighborhood, and on a 0 to 100 scale, it'll tell you how walkable or not the place is. So if you have a walk score of 5 or 10, it means you have to drive everywhere. If you have a walk score of 1 or 2, you have to drive to go to the bathroom. If you have a walk score above 70, it's a walkable urban place. Well, the green dots, the 150 walkable urban places that we identified in metropolitan New York, is obviously all on the right, above 70 walk score. The left-hand side is an index of GDP per capita and real estate valuation. It's a merged index. So this is where is the property worth most and where do we produce the most GDP per capita. And look at how that takes off as the walkable urbanism takes off. That what we're now seeing in Metro New York, for every one walk score increase over 70, so from 75 to 76, from 85 to 86, from 90 to 91 walk score, the value of the average real estate asset in Metro New York goes up by $20 a square foot. One walk score point, $20 a square foot valuation increase. Pretty significant as far as what the market's telling us. So here's where it's happening. Downtown Bethesda. You probably remember it 20 years ago. It was a pretty forgotten place. The photo in the upper left-hand side, done by B.F. Saul, those Twin Towers, 20 years ago, that was the famous Bob's Big Boy Drive-In, which all the Bethesda high school kids would love to go to. Those Twin Towers are now getting $65 a square foot in rent. Arlington, the most important urbanizing suburb. We've learned so much from Arlington. This is on Wilson Boulevard, and this shot there shows you the Sears store, closed in the mid-1980s. The Sears store is on the left. On the right is the closed garden center, and where the picture was taken is where the tire and car repair center was. This is the same photograph today from the same perspective. What you're looking at is an Apple store, Whole Foods, restaurants, $700 per square foot condos. And the interesting thing is you go 2 blocks north and south of it, it feathers back to suburbia. It's single-family housing. Those houses, 2 blocks north and 2 blocks south, are the most expensive houses in the entire county on a price per square foot basis. Why? They have the best of both worlds. They can live in suburbia and walk to 50 restaurants, the metro station, maybe walk to work. And therefore, their quality of life goes up, therefore, their value of their homes go up. The other thing is that the walkable urban land in Arlington represents 11% of their total land mass. Very high number. In the 1980s, in the bad old 1980s, it generated 20% of their tax base and falling for obvious reasons. As Sears was closing up, the car dealers were moving out. Today, it's 55% of their tax base. They've shifted their taxes from single-family housing to the walkable urban places. And the other thing they've done is that, the bulk of that development was housing, rental apartment, condos, and everybody say, oh my God, don't bring rental apartments. That means poor people might live there. And poor people, we don't want to educate their kids. We don't do that. And well, it turns out that all that rental housing, all that condo housing, all these people moved there, and then they forgot to have kids. That the school-age child generation rate of those condos is 1/8 that of the single-family housing. As a result, that the county school district, which speaks 80 different languages, is spoken in that school district. It's among the best in the country, as all those people are paying taxes but not sending their kids to school. A lot of other examples. The other fascinating thing that we learned from the county: 4-fold increase in the square footage along Wilson Boulevard over the last 20 years. The absolute car counts on Wilson Boulevard, the absolute number of cars that drive on Wilson Boulevard over the last 20 years has gone down. The entire growth has been transported there by metro, bike, walking. Go out to Denver. This is the first regional mall in Denver. It was called Via Italia. The developer must have gone to Italy and thought that putting those little arches on a regional mall would make it Italian. And obviously, in the 70s, highly successful. Parking lots are jammed. By 1999, there was one department store still open. The rest of the mall went dark, which is what's going to happen to 40% of all malls in the next recession. They're going away. We all know that. And what a friend of mine did is he worked with the city to bulldoze it, put in a grid of streets, bring back a mixed-use walkable urban place, and it now gets 80% price premiums over the rest of the market, and they put a tax base under the city of Lakewood, Colorado. Here's Avalon, north of Atlanta on Georgia 400. This is a greenfield site. A friend of mine took this greenfield site, and this is old. This is at the end of phase 1. He's just completed phase 2. And just add water and poof, he has an instant rest-in-town center. Unbelievably successful. Here's down in Dallas, about 40 miles north of downtown Dallas, off of a major freeway, is this glorious little walkable urban place, Waters Creek, that just sprung up over the last 5 years, doing unbelievably well. I always like to point out in this part of the world, downtown Chattanooga. I've been working on downtown Chattanooga for 30 years, and it's just a great turnaround story of a Rust Belt town that has just revitalized itself by embracing their river, by putting in walking paths, by putting in a circulator system. It's just a remarkable turnaround. And it's not just the downtown, but it's downtown adjacent places, the university. The University of Tennessee is here, the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. It's just like what you're seeing in downtown Richmond with VCU. So I want to show you 2 more sets of numbers just to demonstrate probably where you are in this trend. Because what we found in this country is that we have leaders and we have laggards. And you're kind of a laggard, but you're moving. I mean, we can prove that, but you're not in the leadership position. That here we have 3 metro areas, Dallas, Fort Worth, Atlanta, and DC. And the walkable urban market share in 2010, as you can see, Dallas, Fort Worth was 10%, Atlanta was 16%, DC was 33%. So that's everything built for all time up until 2010. Up in DC, it was 33% of the development was walkable urban. When you look at the marginal growth from 2010 through the end of 2017, 8 years, Dallas-Fort Worth, 30% of the marginal growth is walkable urban. So that's a 3-fold increase in market share. It's gaining market share. Atlanta, 49% of all growth has been walkable urban. And Metro DC is 91% of all development is walkable urban. If you're still building drivable suburban in DC, you're probably out of business. In fact, I hate to say it, but my brother is doing just that, and he's out of business. It's painful to watch. And by the way, in Dallas-Fort Worth, 59% of all the office space in this cycle has gone to walkable urban places. And in Dallas, even they're getting somewhat reasonable, somewhat sizable price premiums, 13 to 31% price premium for walkable urban rents in office and multifamily. So what all of this means is that we have to fundamentally change how we build the built environment and the skill sets that we have to employ. I liken it to the fact that we in real estate got really good at driving NASCARs. NASCARs, you may know, go 150, 180 miles per hour and can only turn left, which is somewhat ironic given their politics. But what we now have to learn how to do is that we have to learn how to fly fighter jets, where you're going 600 miles per hour, turning right, turning left, go up 5 miles or crash and burn in seconds while you're being shot at. It's a fundamentally different way of doing business, much more complex. But the upsides can be remarkable. And one of the things that we found in walkable urban development, unlike drivable suburban, is that as you add more to a place, it just gets better. There's an upward spiral of value creation. That next restaurant that opens up next to your apartment building, and the second restaurant that opens up next to the first restaurant, puts more people on the street. There's more activity. It's safer. There's more people watching. Your property goes up in value. Your property taxes go up in value. It's just this remarkable upward spiral. When I've done 17 different real estate development projects, all walkable urban, and all of them, we, of course, help our competitors across the street. We'll give you our market studies. We'll introduce you to the city. We'll help you get moving, because by their going forward successfully, even if it's in direct competition with us, we'll do better. It's this more is better with walkable urbanism. Now, no such thing as a free lunch. We have a massive affordable housing problem. And I could spend another hour talking about that. The issue is, and I'm going to go through this real fast, is the skill sets that you have here need to be re-engineered. That if you have great drivable suburban skill sets and apply them to walkable urban, you'll fail. From a site acquisition point of view, from a construction point of view, from an underwriting point of view, from a capital stack point of view, from an investment point of view, from a management point of view. It's fundamentally different, and I'm not going to go through this, but it's all the complete opposite of drivable suburban. So what about you here? What are you about to embark on in a few weeks? Because this is significant for the future of your region and the future of real estate investment. This 7.6 miles, $65 million bus rapid transit system, one of the first in the US, but we're laggards in BRT. We're seeing BRT throughout the world successfully being deployed. And again, keep in mind that we're looking at the economic development of these things. That's why you build these things. You don't build these things to move people. And particularly what you've been doing with your bus system is you've been building your bus system to move poor people. That the BRT will be successful when you all in this audience take it as a mode of choice, because it's better, faster, cheaper. And you've got 15 stations. My sense, and again, I've been involved with this for the last 5 years, working with your city, that if I were you from a site selection point of view, I'd be looking around VCU in the middle of Broad Street. Probably, and the smaller projects are going to go to the south, and there's going to be some major projects going to the north of Broad Street because there's some major industrial land that can be converted. And that would be number one where I would look. And number two would be on the east side, Rockets Landing. And these are, I think, the places that are going to see the most appreciation. You know, we all know what business is all about. Buy low, sell high. And my sense is that these two areas of the BRT is where you want to be looking. You're not going to see much to the west because it gets super drivable suburban, and the property owners, Federal Realty owns the strip mall where it terminates. And while Federal Realty is a great walkable urban developer, that's only a small part of the company. The mainstream strip mall owners that are part of Federal Realty don't have a clue. And that strip mall out there is going to stay a strip mall for many years. So we don't see much on the west. And downtown, there'll certainly be some movement downtown, but of course it's already highly built out. It's not that it won't see more, but you won't see the kind of price appreciation we think will in fact occur to the east and to the west. So the best place to learn about BRT in this country is a town that you probably would never think you would be a model, but of all places, Cleveland. They've put in the Health Line, going from downtown out to the universities to the east and to the and out to the medical center. And it's been open 5 years. $5.5 billion of new investment has gone along Euclid Boulevard, which is where that BRT line goes. So, just in closing, you know, over the last 20, 30 years, we've been thinking about walkable urbanism as a niche market. Well, we now are finding it is the market. Thank you very much.
Chris, thank you very much. That was awesome. Although, as somebody that's still stuck in the drivable suburban with kids in school, it's somewhat depressing. Anyway, for those who don't know me, I'm Andy Proctor, Atlantic Real Estate Capital, and my sole purpose up here is to point at you as you ask questions. But I'm going to start us off. Lunch today, we talked a little bit. Somebody mentioned Scott's Addition, which is in that area that you kind of had circled near VCU. That's called a VCU adjacent. That's one of the newer walkable urban projects in the Richmond area. 6 years ago, I was helping a client raise capital to convert a warehouse to an apartment building there. Right. At the time, engaged a feasibility study. So this was 2012. And, you know, the feasibility study said, as long as you build it by 2014, you're good to go, multifamily. Mm-hmm. What we've seen that a lot in Richmond, where the multifamily just keeps going and going. Yep. So you talked a little bit about demand, but is there also, you know, is demand driving supply, or is some of it a case of build it and they will come?
It's both. There is pent-up demand for this, and my own numbers show that we only add 2% to the built environment in a good year. That's all. And we're looking at 30, 40% pent-up demand. So it's going to take a long time to catch up with that pent-up demand. And that's why we have these price premiums. And the other term for this, of course, is gentrification. Either the most loved word or the most hated word in the real estate language. And so there's a lot of pent-up demand. Now, it doesn't say that we in real estate won't overbuild. You all know in real estate we can overbuild any market. No matter how good it is, we're going to overbuild it. And rental apartment, of course, has been on a tear for the last 6, 7 years. It's what's really kept us going, because the single-family market is still in the tank. We are building less single-family homes today and over the last 4 or 5 years than we built in the downturns of the late 20th century. We have more people in the country, and we're at full employment, and we're booming, but we're building less homes, single-family homes. And I was just with the National Association of Home Builders yesterday, and they're just scratching their head, and I'm saying, you're building the wrong product. You guys don't get how to build this fighter pilot-based product that I was telling the story. We have a project outside of Philadelphia, which is a 9-hole golf course that we converted to a walkable urban place, sort of a a downsized version of Reston Town Center. And 2 stories from there. One is it took us 11 years to get the zoning and 2 trips to the state Supreme Court. I mean, the brain damage is just crazy, and millions of dollars. But that one of our products was a 2-over-2 townhouse right across from the new Main Street that was built from scratch. And we were dealing with Toll Brothers. They were going to build the product for us. We had the land. 2-over-2, right up to the sidewalk, alley loaded. We go to Toll Brothers' Suburban division, and we fried all their circuits. They just said, what the hell is this? We've never seen this at all. We went to the Toll Urban division, and it was like hot knife through butter. We get this. So the issue is that we have to retool the industry and figure out how to get the land zoned. Again, most of it's illegal to build upon, so you have to go through that nonsense. And then you have to retool yourself to figure out how to do this from a financial point of view, from a site acquisition point of view, from a construction point of view.
As a follow-up, as the millennials age, start having kids, do you see any swing back the other way?
Well, again, as I talked about that marginal growth in household growth over the next 20 years, that includes the aging of the millennials. A lot of millennials are not having kids. That whole trend towards they're having kids, including my kids are having kids, of course, but they're having many fewer kids, and it's overwhelmed by the number of baby boomers becoming empty nesters and retiring. So that's where only 14% of net growth will have school-age kids in their households. But having said that, a lot of millennials will be moving to the suburbs. We think that's one of the major things driving the urbanization of the suburbs, because they will move to the better schools, but they still want to live in a walkable urban place.
Makes sense. Okay. We have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, it's decentralized. Yep. Go bankrupt. The question was, what do retailers do? I mean, we are the most over-retailed country on the planet. We have 3 times as much retail as the Germans on a per capita basis, and twice as much as the Brits. And so we're incredibly over-retailed, and obviously Amazon's hammering them at one end, but the stuff that's growing are the walkable urban forms. Restaurants, the soft goods stores that you walk in and see what's, touch and feel the product, and then it's shipped to you overnight. Or the biggest retail concept that is growing is, of course, food halls. We don't know how many food halls we need per 1,000, or per 100,000, but, probably in this region you're going to need 3, 4, 5 food halls that'll anchor great walkable urban places. And they don't exist right now. But as I say, the regional malls, I mean, we know that Sears and Penny's and Macy's are all among the walking dead. They're the anchors of about 1/3 of all the malls. Those malls are gone in this next recession. And even the malls that stay are just flatlining. Even Tyson's 1 and 2. I mean, they're going to be, they're just fine, but they're not going to see any kind of serious sales growth from their $800 per square foot average now. The other thing that's happening, of course, with retail, and we're just beginning to understand this, is the impact of the experience economy on retail. And the best example of the experience economy on retail is, of course, the Apple Store. So Steve Jobs opens up the Apple Store. He was still alive when he came up with this. And people said, you are crazy, forward integrating to a retail business when you're making hardware. I mean, this is mad. And so to give you just how well he's done, in retail, the range of sales per square foot per year goes from a low end of like a Macy's at $300, $400 a square foot. By the way, the Sears store up in Montgomery County, in the Montgomery County Mall, is doing $100 a square foot. I mean, this is just mad. So, a Macy's does $400, a Whole Foods does $1,000 per square foot per year in sales. The highest store has always been jewelry stores, because they sell very little things that are very expensive. They do $1,500, $1,800 per square foot per year. Apple Store comes out, and they're doing between $7,000 and $10,000 per square foot. So this isn't retail. I used to pole vault as a kid, and the world record in pole vaulting is now about 21 feet. That's as if somebody came out and pole vaulted 80 feet. That's not pole vaulting, that's a different sport. And Apple Store is just, and what they did is that they took the lowest paid person, the clerk, and turned them into a computer consultant that you want to come in and experience and learn from. That's going to happen with retail throughout. I mean, we don't know how it's going to happen in all these different retail formats. We're making this up as we go. But Apple Store is something to learn from. A much higher productivity coming out of retail, and those that are not go bankrupt.
Do we have mics in the audience? I think. All right. Do we have any other questions over here? We have a microphone right there for you.
What you just said about Apple, but in the county surrounding Richmond, Suburban County, Henrico, it seemed to take forever, and I'm not a developer, but I'm just interested in land use, mainly from a forestry point of view. Mm-hmm. It took forever before Henrico would agree to a new zoning code called UMU, Urban Mixed Use, with the retail at the bottom and residential at the top. Why the resistance? Why does it take so long? I mean, hasn't Europe been doing this forever?
Yep, they have. We also learn a lot from Europe because they have been doing this forever. That a lot of it is fear of change, of course, even though it's change of 1 or 2% of their total land. It is not as if you're going to Manhattanize Henrico County. It's going to be a very small percentage. The other thing is that it's gotten political. Pew Trust shows us that walkable urban communities, 80% tend to be Ds, and master plan communities, 80% of the residents tend to be Rs. So there was a congressman in Northern Virginia that was fighting that kind of zoning in Northern Virginia, and his line was, people that move into places like that don't vote for people like me. I'm opposed to it. So there is that. There's a fear of just diversity. We've really gotten ourselves into a position in this country that birds of a feather flock together. I mean, look at this crowd right here. I mean, this is as lily white as you can get. And we fear diversity. But look at the future demographics. I mean, it's not 2040 is when the white population becomes the minority in this country. Deal with it. So there's a lot of things people are fearing, and there's a friend of mine, Tony Downs, who's one of the great urbanists. He lives in Northern Virginia. He's at Brookings, and he just can't. He lives in a beautiful McMansion in McLean, and he just cannot imagine living in a flat on Mass Ave. It's just beyond him, and that only weird people would ever want to do that. So there's just a negative reaction. Is there a mic? Good question. Question was about parking. Parking is, of course, part of the transportation system. And any of you that are in real estate know how parking drives development. What we're seeing is drivable suburban ratios, commercial ratios for parking are anywhere from 4 to 9 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of building. Each parking space takes 350 square feet, so do the math. We're building far more parking space than we build space for people. And we've been doing that for 50 years. And so since surface parking is so cheap and land's so cheap, that's why we call it dirt cheap, since we have so much of it, that we just pave over it. And at $5 a square foot to put in a surface parking lot, it's very cheap. When we move to walkable urban, you're going to see parking ratios plummet. They're going to go from 4, 5, 6 parking spaces per 1,000 to under 1. So when you first do walkable urban, you've got to build parking, decked parking, which costs a lot of money, and then give it away. Not a great way to make money, but that's part of the drill. And so you have to satisfy those suburbanites who are coming into your walkable urban place, but they're going to drive there. When they move there and they get rid of their car, the demands go down. And so we're seeing in Metro DC, in DC in particular, in Arlington, new rental apartment projects being built with 0 parking. You don't need it. Right now, 60% of DC residents don't have a car, or they have 1 car for their household, what is considered car light. And by the way, the other thing about cars, getting rid of cars, I talked about the fact that most spending on cars leave the metropolitan economy. You drop 1 car out of your household. The AAA tells us the cost of typical American Camry will be $9,200 per year to own, operate, service the debt, fuel. Fuel is actually the smallest category, and yet people make their decisions based upon fuel. But $9,200 per year. You convert that if you dropped a car out of your household, converted it into a mortgage payment, it supports $150,000 worth of mortgage payment. So the choice is, do you put it into your cash flow into a depreciable asset or into an appreciable asset? And so the big macroeconomic trend over the next 20 years will be the shift of household spending from transportation into what we do in real estate, build houses.
Anyone else? Fred?
With your premise of more is better and the slide with the concentric circles, where do you...
That's meant to be an upward spiral.
Upward spiral, okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Where do you see the future of air rights?
Oh, huge. In that 2, 3, 4% of land that is walkable urban. Most of the churches in DC and New York have been rebuilt because of air rights. Now, the problem with DC, of course, is that we have the height limit, which is, in essence, above the 12th floor. Those air rights belong to us, the citizens, and are worth billions of dollars. But because of the height limit, we can't monetize it. But many of the churches, even in DC, but certainly in New York, have taken the air rights and shifted them and unlocked millions of dollars and redone their church and created an endowment, and we've maintained that historic building, and the congregation stays there. So it's that really creative uses of air rights is a really big deal. But as I say, in DC, we have handicapped ourselves with the height limit. By the way, when I've mentioned that in public, I've not won a lot of friends. And in fact, I've got my first death threat by mentioning that in public. But the guy was 85 years old, so I didn't take it too seriously.
Anyone else?
Sure. Education is obviously critical for that 14% of the household growth that have school-age kids. So, it's less important than when you and I were raising kids, but it's obviously still quite important for a pretty, a sizable segment of the market. 2 things are happening. One is what I've mentioned earlier is the urbanization of the suburbs. So people moving to Bethesda, to Arlington, for their high-quality schools, but living in a walkable urban manner. And also, I mean, the millennials are also going to be attracted by those ungodly low prices for drivable suburban homes. Those home prices, I didn't really mention this, but it goes back to the point that you raised just up front. I mean, you can't sell a McMansion in less than a year or two, and you're going to be selling it at a third, a quarter of the price per square foot of a walkable urban place. That we've just overbuilt McMansions. But therefore they're cheap. And so the millennials coming up, if they can't justify paying $600 a square foot for a walkable urban place, they look at $150 a square foot McMansion, they might be tempted, even though they have to get 3 or 4 cars, and even though it's not what they want, but good Lord, it's cheap. And they have better schools. So it's, one answer is the urbanization of the suburbs in good school districts, and we're seeing that throughout the country. But the other thing is some, and this is not a wave of a trend, but we're seeing some urban school districts are turning around. And certainly DC is a great model, and I can give my granddaughter, who walks from a single-family home in the Northwest, walks to her grade school. And and my son-in-law had gone to private schools his entire life and was really panicked about sending me, beautiful Guinevere to a public school. And so we went to a PTA meeting, and we talked to one of the older parents their kid was graduating from 5th grade, going into middle school. And he said, I can't wait to get my hands on the middle school so we can whip it into shape just like we did with this grade school. So it starts with the parents, starts from kindergarten on up, and the schools are quantitatively and qualitatively changing for the better, which is a good news story. So you can pick and choose which way you want to go. Work the system and make the schools better, or go to a good school outside, a good school district in an urbanizing suburb.
I think we had a question over here as well.
So we talked about the stages leading up to walkable urbanism. I'm curious to see if you think that walkable urbanism is the final stage that people will try to attain everywhere, or if you think there's a stage that comes after.
I really can't see after, because I'm dead at that point, so my crystal ball goes completely blank. But again, with 30, 40 years of pent-up demand, it's going to be, for most of the people in this room, it'll be your career as far as how you invest 35% of the wealth of the country. But keep in mind, this is both and. I mean, drivable suburban is perfectly a great way to live for many of us. It's just that we've overbuilt it. And walkable urban has the pent-up demand. We're sort of in the pent-up demand stage that drivable suburban was in say, 1960. So we've got another good 30 years to run until we overbuild it. What comes after that? Don't have a clue. So there actually is still a chance for flying cars. Yes, there is. Absolutely. Particle, that we decompose ourselves and, Star Trek-y kind of stuff.
There's another new product out there, and we talked a little bit about Serenbe down in Atlanta, which is the agricultural-based communities where you've got residential development, mixed-use development built around a working farm. Yep. Can you speak to how that might impact the walkable urbanism?
Sure. It's known as conservation development. It started with a project called Prairie Crossing north of Chicago up in Lake County. And a friend of mine did it. He and his wife did it. And he asked us, my development company, to take it over. And for about 2 years, we were the fee developer of it until we then found him a permanent solution. And it's 50, 60, 70% of the land is in reserve, is in its natural condition, or it's a farm. And that's what Serenbe is. And then 10, 20, 30% of the land is walkable urban. And it appeals to a lot of folks because when you go out your front door, you have urbanism. You're within walking distance of restaurants and cafes and bookstores. go out the back door and you're either on farmland or you're in the wilderness. And that's kind of the best of all worlds for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people love the wilderness, and a lot of people would love to also have some connection because we're social creatures. So Serenbe is a great example. I've been down there a lot, and the folks doing it are really doing a remarkable job. And most importantly, from a motivational point of view, to make more of these things work, he's making a lot of money.
Sure.
So it'll replicate.
Great. We have time for one or two more questions if there are any out there.
Back to the improving school districts in the inner city. I mean, are we improving the tax base enough in the inner cities to make a difference in the dealing with some of the social problems? I mean, you mentioned there's a lack of affordable housing. What happens? Are these people leaving the cities, or are the cities able to help these people a little bit better than they did before?
So I'll use Washington again, since it's the best model in the country. You all know what Washington was like 20 years ago. Murder capital, bankrupt, taken over by the feds. Downtown had 90 surface parking lots. Downtown was a place you wouldn't be caught dead in. Then again, you might have been. It was a pretty nasty place. And, phenomenal flight out, both white and black, out of Washington. Today, Washington, D.C. has the highest credit rating of any city in the country. Every school, every park, every library, and every community center has been rebuilt, has been redeveloped, or a new one built. My daughter's school was just rebuilt. They still can't quite figure out how to build the affordable housing. They have hundreds of millions of dollars set aside for affordable housing, and they can't get it out the door. So I'm not saying that it's perfect, but certainly it's a whole hell of a lot better than it was 20 years ago. And that's because those 90 surface parking lots are now tax-generating mixed-use development. Will we be able to turn around these social issues? Who knows? Because it's a long reach, and racism plays a role, and years of living in poverty play a role, we know so. A lot of the work at Brookings just reinforces what we all were taught as kids: is that you get your degree, you get married, then you have kids in that order. And obviously, a lot of our society doesn't get their degree, don't get married, and then they have kids, and it wrecks their lives. So those social challenges, I'm not trying to minimize them, but we certainly, at least in D.C. and in New York and in Boston and a lot of other places, we have the financial means by which to do it. The question is whether we can change those social trends.
Time for one more. In the back there.
Right. The research is in. The question was about the experience of building affordable housing, but in a concentrated manner. And we know that's a disaster. Concentrated poverty, you get concentrated poverty about, above 20, 25%, and it goes very quickly to 80%, and all the social indicators just go haywire. Crime goes up, education goes down, all the bad things happen. So we don't want to concentrate poverty. But that's virtually the entire affordable housing strategy of the late 20th century was to concentrate poverty, and in the non-favored quarter. We have two solutions. The one that we've been doing right now, this third approach, which is concentrate poverty and have poor people drive to clean our houses and to clean our office buildings and to serve us food. So that's one approach. There's two other approaches that we know work better. One is to bring opportunity to low-income places, bring jobs to the non-favored quarter, and that's just beginning to happen in D.C. as I mentioned earlier, on the Green Line to the northeast and to the southeast. So that's really a big move. The second thing, which I'm sure sends chills down your back, is to move affordable housing, workforce housing, into high opportunity places. And the best way to do that, which involves zero subsidy, it is just staring at us in the face, is to make auxiliary housing legal, otherwise known as granny flats. That when I was walking to school as a second grade outside of Philadelphia, living in a walkable urban place, and walking to school past a row house that was 2 blocks from my single-family house, and out of the basement apartment walked my beloved second-grade school teacher, Miss Demand, and we walked to school together. I obviously remember it 60 years later. And what I didn't know at the moment, or then, but I obviously know now, is she was in an English basement apartment. It was an auxiliary housing unit that provided more cash flow for the folks who owned the house and workforce and affordable housing for my school teacher. That is illegal in almost all of metropolitan Richmond. That is not legal to do. We have 130 million households in this country. I'm going to bet there's 130 million spare bedrooms. And a lot of you have those spare bedrooms, and you'd be interested in renting them out, making a little, a design modification, because you don't want them to be walking through your house, of course. But it's illegal to do it. And we could solve the affordable housing problem, or at least take 60, 70% out of the affordable housing challenge we have by just making auxiliary housing units legal. And the market will take care of it.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for being here and sharing your knowledge with us. As a token of
Thank you so much. Great.
I'd like to invite up Vince Nader with Kiter to wrap things up.
Hi, everybody. I'll be quick so that you'll like me. I learned a lot today from Chris, but you can imagine my surprise when I learned that I am now considered lily white. That's new to me. But one more hand for Chris, please. Thanks. Also like to thank our host today, Mark, with Commonwealth Commercial and Lingerfelt CommonWealth Partners. And as you're milling around out back, there's a few sponsors here. You'll see the green tag on their name tag. Tell them thanks or good job or however you feel like it. Trotman Sanders, Sauer Properties, Union Bank and Trust, Kiter, Atlantic Real Estate Capital, Marsh & McLennan Agency, Baskerville, West Creek, and Spyrock Real Estate Group. Without all the sponsors, this probably wouldn't have happened, but so tell them thanks. And lastly, we will be having a reception out back, so you can unsilence your phones, call your spouse, tell them you're going to be late, and join us for a drink.